So I just got back from the Panasonic S1H launch event in Hollywood and was working on my video when I noticed the DP Review already posted theirs. So I watched it, and Jordan absolutely nailed it. It covers pretty much everything you need to know about the camera, and you know my policy about videos, I don't like to make videos if somebody else already made one and did a great job. I'd rather just link to it and give them the views, and I'm still going to do that, but I wanted to make something on the S1H, so instead I'm going to focus on the little nerdier details that I found interesting. Let's get undone. What's happening, everybody? I'm Gerald Undone, and I am a redundant audio solution. So first up, let's talk about performance, and I don't mean the camera's performance, but I mean editing performance, because I think 6K is great, and I'm glad that companies are adding it to their lineups, but are you going to be able to edit it without using proxies? Now, this is pretty hard to give a definitive answer to, given the different computer configurations and software options available, but what I can do is give you a bit of a gauge to help you decide if you'll be able to handle it. So I've got two clips here. The first one is your typical 4K H.264, 150 megabits per second, 10-bit long GOP file from the S1H, and this is typical to the type of file that you'd be used to working with if you've shot with Panasonic in the past. And then I've got a 5.9K 10-bit 200 megabits per second long GOP from the S1H. Now, the first clip was at 24 frames per second, but this second clip is at 30 frames per second, just to put the maximum, stress on this test. But the other difference is that the second clip, the 5.9K, is using the HEVC H.265 high efficiency codec, which is much more demanding on your computer because it's a much more tighter, finely compressed file, which is more demanding typically for your computer to unpack. Now, it means you're going to get more out of that 200 megabits per second than you would get on H.264, but it will have a negative impact on performance overall. So if we use the first 4K H.264 file as a baseline here and we play it back in the timeline, we can see that we're not dropping any frames, but if we look at the task manager here, we can see that we're requiring about 30% CPU usage, just a little bit higher than that, and about 19%, 18-19% of our GPU. And my system, by the way, which you can see here, uses an Intel i7-8700K at about 4.8 gigahertz overclocked, and my GPU is an NVIDIA GTX 1080. Now let's move over to the 5.9K clip and see what we're getting there. So we play this back, our CPU actually drops down to now only about 10%, but our GPU usage went way up to now about 40, in the mid 40s. And the timeline performance is fine, but what this is telling us is that now the H.265 is being handled by the graphics card and not the CPU like it was with H.264. But if we jump over to Premiere, which has poor GPU optimization for this purpose, we'll get different results. So let's play back the H.264 clip in Premiere and take a look. So our CPU usage is about 32%, and our GPU is around 10%. Now, that's pretty similar to what we saw in Resolve. But now if we move over to the 6K clip, first of all, we're getting some frame drops, quite a few there in the beginning, and we'll look, our CPU is now all the way up to 100%, and our GPU is only at about 19%. And even when the CPU kind of settles down, it never really goes below 70 to 80% and usually stays up in the 80% sometimes, as you can see here. So this shows obviously that Premiere Pro is not using the GPU to the same effectiveness in order to deal with the H.265 files, and instead the CPU has to do a lot more work. Now, it was still workable in this current state, and I found that I could still edit it without too much trouble, but if we wanted to add a second stream, or change the color grade on two different streams, or maybe layer some things up like we can see here, then it becomes a big problem. So let's play this back, and you can see there's already the extent in the beginning. We're just pinned at 100% CPU, and now our GPU is at 50% as well. Now I'm going to include a link to the file that I just showed for testing there in the description below so that you can download it and test it yourself and see how it performs on your system. And another thing that you should know is that file was about 19 to 20 seconds long and took up 440 megabytes. So that means that you'll need about 90 gigabytes for every hour of recording with the 5.9K at 30 frames a second. But without even downloading the file, we can make a couple of deductions about the performance. First of all, if you're currently struggling with 4K H.264 on your setup, then the 6K H.265 is going to be probably about twice as hard or give you 2 times worse performance. Also, if you don't have a modern GPU, or if you're using a program that doesn't really utilize the GPU like Premiere, then you're going to find the H.265 to be specifically difficult to work with without transcoding it first. But to quantify this, if you want to take a look at one of your current 4K edits with your grades and your effects applied, and play it back and check the task manager to see what your CPU usage is. And if it's already like 50 to 60% or higher, then you probably will struggle a little bit with the S1H's 6K. But also, if you plan to go this route and you're not already using DaVinci Resolve, it might be time to switch if this kind of footage is important to you, because it's much better optimized for the GPU decoding. But like I said, download the sample that I used and test it out for yourself, and then feel free to let me know your results in the comments below. Rest assured, however, that if you have a computer with similar specs or better than mine, that you will be able to edit these files without too many problems, but it does work better in Resolve than it does in Premiere. Also, you should know that when I did this same test using the Blackmagic RAW from the Pocket 6K, it was only about half as demanding as the H.265 from the S1H, making the Blackmagic a much smoother edit overall when it comes to 6K performance. Also, these tests were done on a 4K timeline, but if you want a 6K timeline, you might have to reduce your expectations by about 10% because I did notice a little bit more of a performance hit when working with a 6K timeline. However, on that RAW comparison front, there is good news. They mentioned at the announcement that they are working with Atomos to bring RAW recording capabilities to the S1H. And this will hopefully not only help with that editing performance comparison, but also bring some of that workflow flexibility that I've come to really appreciate when working with RAW. There's no ETA on that yet though. And speaking of connecting an S1H to an external recorder, you will get improved chroma subsampling from 420 up to 422 when recording over HDMI. And seemingly this will work all the way up to 6K, but that's kind of moot because I don't really know of a recorder that will capture 6K over HDMI. But because you can do dual recording to internal and external simultaneously, I suppose that you could capture the 6K 420 version to the card and then have that down converted on the Atomos to a 422 10-bit 4K version, which then you could use the card one as like a master, or then even potentially use the Atomos recording as like a proxy so that you didn't have to transcode afterwards if you were finding the 6K files difficult, because the DNX or ProRes recordings from the Atomos will be much easier to edit than that 5.9K H.265 would be. Now, I've got a few more things that I want to tell you about, but to give your brains a little bit of a break after all those numbers and initialisms, here's a quick cut of what some of the other creators' impressions were after first laying hands on this camera.
Anamorphic. It's all about the anamorphic, the multi-aspect ratio. Very excited that stabilization, they just made it a video-centric camera, which is exciting. So.
Well, first off, this right here, I'm sure everybody's going to say this, but as a content creator myself, this flip screen edition is amazing. I wish it was on the S1, but I'm happy to have it here with this amazing camera.
Initial impressions, beautiful camera, hefty solid build. The main thing I like about this camera, articulated origami LCD on the back. Finally, they put that on the full frame version of this camera. It's pretty fantastic.
They've redressed the on-off switch of the S1 and the S1R, which I always thought was kind of funky, and they're using really the same button from the G9. So I much prefer that on, and then that also lights up the screen. The screen itself is bigger, which allows you to have more information on it. I really like that.
Testing it out last night, what I love is the IBIS along with the low light performance. And we were shooting at 12,800, 25,600, and with the IBIS I had no gimbal, and some of the footage I was able to capture is remarkable.
6K shooting clearly is pretty awesome. I know a lot of people are going to say, why would you need 6K? But just like when we were shooting 4K to deliver in 1080p and giving us the room to push in, now we can shoot in 6K, deliver in 4K, and have that room to push in just like we had in the old days. So that's a pretty awesome feature right there.
You know what, a lot of people are probably not mentioning this, is their menu that is exactly like the VariCam. It's a classic 6-button layout, and with the touchscreen, it works exactly like you would on a VariCam or an Ari. Like, it is very, very nice and accessible, and I really like this thing.
By the way, something I've been doing lately that I also did at this event is to make stories on Instagram about the little discoveries that I was making about the camera throughout the day, so make sure you're following me on Instagram to see those. Now, another thing I wanted to talk about was how competent this camera is at photos. I thought for sure we'd be giving up some photo capabilities in order to differentiate it from the S1, but there's basically a fully featured S1 in there, including the 6 frames per second burst and the high resolution photo modes. The only difference really is that it has the optical low pass filter, but other than that, you can do pretty much everything that you can do on the S1 inside this camera as well. And that's great because that's now going to increase the value of the camera for people who want sort of a one camera to do everything rule, because it is expensive at $4,000, but if you factor in I'm getting a fully featured full frame S1 as well as this fantastic new video camera, it actually starts to make the price quite fair. And I really like the S1 as a photo camera. If you remember from my review, I had a lot of great things to say about it, and I have all those same great things to say about the S1H as a photo camera. Another thing I wasn't really expecting is the in-body image stabilization that's in this camera. I just thought it wouldn't have any like the GH5S, but not only does it have it, but it's fantastic. It's just as good as the G9 or the S1 or the GH5 or anything else that we've come to expect from Panasonic, and I've even heard people say that it might even be half a stop better in certain situations, and that's fantastic. In fact, the clip that I uploaded for you to test for the editing performance was actually shot handheld at like 100 millimeters in a really awkward position, moving back and forth between two other shooters, and so it should be sloppy and shaky as hell, especially at 100 mils, but if you look at it, it's actually surprisingly smooth considering how poorly I shot it, and so the IBIS on this camera is very impressive in my opinion. And another thing that I wasn't expecting it to have is the dust, splash, and freeze resistance that it does, considering that it has those big fan grills on the side. So I think that was really smart design in order to maintain the weather resistance from some of the other models, even though it has that active cooling. It also has those display options that the GH5 has where you can change your shutter speed and ISO into shutter angle and gain, which is really nice to have when you're shooting video. And speaking of gain, this is a dual gain system, just like the one you'd find in the GH5S, but this has some applications on photography that you should be aware of as well. So the dual gain changes depending on the gamma curve that you're applying. When you're in normal, it's ISO 100 and ISO 640, meaning that when you go to ISO 640, you then activate the higher gain amplifier. And in the settings, you can set one of three options. You can set auto, low, or high. When you're on low, you can only go between that 100 and 640, and when you're on high, you have to be at 640 and above. You can't go to the lower set. Auto lets you go through them both and just switches the amplifier once you cross over that threshold. But you'll need to keep this in mind for photography because unlike other cameras now, that means that you're going to have that dual gain switch, so you might be better served to maybe stop down your aperture by a third of a stop in order to bump the ISO past that threshold and get into the higher gain mode because it might actually lead to cleaner images. Now, if you're somebody who's used dual gain in video before, you'll understand this. You just have to apply those principles of photography. But if you've never used this before and you're getting this camera as a hybrid camera, you will want to sort of keep that in mind. But it also changes depending on the picture profile or the gamma curve that you're applying. So for instance, if you're using one of the Cine-like profiles, then the ISO ranges change. It goes from ISO 200 and 1250 becomes the two gain settings now. And if you set it to HLG, then they go up further. It's ISO 400 and ISO 2500. And then finally, if you use Vlog, they change to ISO 640 and ISO 4000. Now, I wasn't able to test this precisely because I didn't want to take the RAWs and then not be able to develop them and then have them mean nothing. So I did shoot mostly JPEG while I was there, but I did test something where I put the camera in RAW photo mode and checked and saw if the picture profiles does affect these gains that we're talking about. So when I was in raw photo with the dial set to M in photo mode and I had Vlog on, I messed with the gain settings, and when in high, the ISO does start at 4000, which means that just like with the Sony camera, remember I showed that video about the Sony a7 III, how when you change your picture profile, that the gamma curve does affect the way that the ISO responds to even your raw photos? It seems like it's going to be the same thing with the S1H, where say that you have Vlog set and you forgot to take Vlog off, and then you're in photo mode, you're taking photos. Well, now your dual gain is going to be based on Vlog and not based on the normal mode of 100/640. It's going to be based on the 640 and 4000 ISOs. Another aspect that I know that you guys care about that I looked into is that the S1H can be charged and actively supplied power to using USB. It has a USB-C with power delivery and a power delivery adapter that comes with the camera that will allow you to not only charge the battery, but charge the battery while using the camera, which is great. Now, I didn't do a full battery rundown test because it lasts a lot longer, obviously, when it's plugged in and I only had a limited time with the camera, but it does seem like it's going to stretch your life a lot longer, if not run it seemingly indefinitely. I love being able to charge my camera via USB now that I've gotten used to with other cameras, and the ability to be able to charge your battery while using the camera is great, and that's a feature that I wish that my GH5 had. And speaking of photography, the shutter is rated for 400,000 cycles, and it has two UHS-2 card slots, not a UHS-2 and an XQD card, but the two card slots now work in parity in the same way as the GH5 did, so you can not only write to backup, like you can write the same video files or photo files to both cards, or you can choose which ones go where, but you also have that relay recording mode where you can write to one card, and when it fills up, it starts writing to the second card, and then they're hot swappable, so then you could take out the first card and put a fresh one in, so when the second card is used up, it goes back to card one, and you can do this over and over and over again for as long as you can supply power to it. Oh, and lastly, since so many of you asked about it, the VFR mode, the in-camera built-in slow motion mode that slows it down automatically for you, all the functionality that was missing from the S1 is back on the S1H. So you can autofocus and you can adjust your exposure settings, which you couldn't do on the S1. Now, I kind of got the impression from talking to people that they're not going to ever fix that or add that to the S1. It's going to be one of the differentiating factors between the two cameras, but you can do it on the S1H now. But there's no audio, just like normal when using a VFR mode. But it does have a great 1080p 120 frames per second option, which comes in 10-bit and does have audio recording, as Jordan from that DP review video that I recommended demonstrated.
Oh my God!
So I think that's everything that I wanted to talk about. I hope I covered some details that you haven't already seen elsewhere. And let me know in the comments how intrigued you are by this camera and if you'll be adding it to your wish list. But that's going to be it for me. I hope you found this video helpful or at least entertaining. And if you did, make sure you leave it the old thumbs up and consider subscribing if you haven't already. But if you did not find this video helpful or entertaining, feel free to hit the dislike button twice. All right, I'm done.